And welcome everyone to episode 57 of The Mindful Marketer. And we are going to have a great discussion today. Remember, we're already seeing everyone letting us know where you're from. We're very happy you're here. And we want to welcome your questions as well. One thing I want to share with you before we get started and before we welcome our special guest, Constance Dierickx, to the stage, is to let you know that it's still time to do something new in 2022, not only for your stakeholders, but for your career. So if you are a marketing leader, you're feeling isolated, you're trying to keep up with the pace of change, know that you don't need to go it alone. So consider applying to our private communities known as the Marketing Growth Leaders. This community, now 10 years strong, reports double-digit top-line growth improvements, better customer retention, and faster growing careers. So go to marketinggrowthleaders.com for details and to complete the application. In this timely episode of the Mindful Marketer Livestream, also we recognize that the topic itself is very timely. So I want to just take a few seconds of silence to recognize our brethren in Ukraine. Okay, let's get our show started today. During these times of global turmoil, customer crisis, company identity, and existential crisis, we all know great marketers who don't fight, fly, or freeze. These great marketers know how to tame turmoil. And fortunately today, our special guest knows a lot about that. Constance Dierickx is a fellow 100 Coaches member and a Harvard Business Review contributor. And one of my favorite books of hers, since she is the decision doctor, is The Merger Mindset, which she co-authored with Linda Henman. She understands, having advised many board executives throughout the decades, how to tame turmoil. She brings also a special gift in that she's also a licensed psychologist. So let's welcome Constance Dierickx. Constance, hello.
Hi, Lisa. Wow, great to see you, virtually at least.
Yes, it's great to see you. And thanks for joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. I want you to know we have people joining us from Washington, D.C. We have Katie from Washington. We have Chris joining us from the Big Apple in New York. We have a number of people waving to one another. So we're just very happy that you're all here today.
Yeah.
Now, Constance, you and I have worked for a few decades, shall we say?
Shall we say?
Tell me, how does the amount of turmoil compare to other years that you've been working and advising C-suite executives?
Well, the current turmoil is different in a couple ways. One is the amount, as you just said, the amount or the magnitude, and it's coming from different areas. So you have a pandemic, a global pandemic. If I hear the phrase supply chain one more time, I think I might scream, but it's reality that we're living with. We have people leaving the workforce in record numbers. I read a statistic earlier that in November of 2021, 4.5 million people, 3% of the workforce, voluntarily left their jobs. So we're dealing with massive numbers of people deciding for whatever reason to leave their jobs. And so the more turmoil you have magnitude wise, and then the more directions from whence it arrives, the more destabilizing it is and the harder it is for leaders to keep their footing. But the more important it is for C-suite executives to do exactly that. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be done and doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it.
Yes. And speaking of turmoil, I want to share the kind of turmoil I'm witnessing
Yeah, please.
since the turmoil really began when COVID was officially named a pandemic.
Hmm.
The aftermath I'm seeing is internal discord, disengagement of employees,
Hmm.
radical double-digit turnover of good
Yeah.
people. Not just a few people leaving here and there, but like one of my clients that's a well-respected public company had 47% turnover of their marketing people. And the other is the one that a lot of people don't seem to want to talk about, which is the ramifications of the pandemic, the mental illness and burnout that people are feeling.
Hmm.
And then I think the third one that stacks up there for our marketing leaders is they're focusing so much just on their inbox, on tactical problem solving every day,
Hmm.
and feeling like they're back in the trenches, just trying to keep their head above water.
Yes. 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 You're so right. I'm seeing that too in marketing teams and in other teams. And it's a very normal and very understandable human reaction that when things are really chaotic and they're almost geometric progression of turmoil, that we want to narrow our focus because we just can't. We all have bandwidth, whether it's emotional or cognitive, whatever it is, we have bandwidth and we can go above it. But the advice that I give, my first piece of advice is forget about that phrase lean in, lean out. You have to take a step back or 5 steps back in whatever way makes sense given your context and see a bigger picture. It's easy to get pulled into, I need to answer this email or I need, and of course, CMOs and marketing leaders below them often get approached by people telling them what to do, telling them what is needed. Okay, we need a new website. We need a new whatever it happens to be, which only adds to the pressure, which is why they need a broad perspective and an ability to tell the story about what the company needs to do, as well as showing people data. And that leaning in is a way to distort reality. Actually, you got to lean out. So that's my phrase. I hope everyone will start using it.
I like that. We always have these great mic drop moments during our sessions together. This is,
Oh,
believe it or not, episode 57. And
wow.
I want people to remember that. Don't lean in, lean out. I also
Yeah.
want to pause and say welcome to Michael from Atlanta joining us today. We have Patek joining us from Turkey. We have dear Erica, one of my clients, joining us from Fairfax,
Oh,
Virginia.
great.
So,
Great.
and we have someone from Kelowna, British Columbia, and also known as a LinkedIn user. So we have some great people here today. I'd like to remind people too, we're taking your live questions.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of leaning out, what I love from your book is this section you talk about the 13 qualities of strategic leaders,
Mm-hmm.
which does really
Mm-hmm.
align with what you're saying around leaning
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Now, this book was written probably 3 or 4 years ago, if I'm not
It was.
mistaken.
Yes.
Based on where we are and the pace at which our C-suite clients need to change,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel those 13 qualities still apply today, or have you made some changes to those with your clients? And maybe you could refer to a few of them for us.
Um, well, the strategic thinking part, I think, is an evergreen piece of advice. And again, that leaning in takes us out of that. That's a different perspective. Lisa, I have to be honest with you. I didn't memorize the 13. So
Well,
if you want to pick a couple and ask me about them, I will say this, though, that every time, if you're putting down thoughts and advice, you're doing it at a point in time and in a context. And when the context changes, it often leads us to, maybe adjust our advice in ways that are nuanced. The core tends to stay the same over time, but when I'm working with someone in a consumer goods company, for example, versus a large academic medical center, the language around my advice changes so that it's relevant to them. But I will also say that sometimes I reflect on what I wrote a year ago or 2 years ago, and I say, I wish I'd have said it differently. And I said it to my coach, a woman that you and I both know well. I said it to her one day and she said, then write something else, write another article for HBR. And I thought, oh yeah. And I found out it's not at its core different, but it is different in the packaging, if you will.
Well, this really is one of my favorite sections of your book. So I'm going to share, and everyone, this is our teachable moment number 2. So here are I'm going to name just a few of them, and then I'm going to remind people that we're taking your questions. The first things to ask yourself as you are zooming out or leaning out is, number 1, do you understand how to separate strategy from tactics? In other words, the what from the how. Yes. Number two is so relevant to today. Can you maintain a global perspective, or are you mired in details and tactics? Yeah. Number 3, how do you respond to obstacles? Number 4, are you known as someone who can create order during chaos?
Yes.
And finally,
good so far, Lisa.
here's one I love. Can you think on your feet?
Yeah.
Can you, now I've given everyone a few as a teaser to your book, The Merger Mindset.
Right.
Can you step us through a recent client situation where they had to apply one of those habits in order to deal with a crisis?
Yes, actually, it was a call this morning.
That's timely.
With a president. And we were talking about a C-suite executive that's problematic. And this president said, well, blah, 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 blah. So here's what I plan to do, da, 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 da. And I stopped and I said, wait a second. How do you know what you just told me? And she said, well, I heard it from da, 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 da. And I said, okay. So those people all have a common perspective and they agree on this person. This person's just not performing and it's too big of a job. This can't go on. And I said, you're assuming, so she heard this much data. And I said, you're assuming that making a move will be more disruptive than you can tolerate. There's too much turmoil already. And I said, what if you remove that person and you discover that people are relieved? And I mean, it's actually a tactic called reversal, where you take what the person is telling you and you flip it. And if it makes sense to ask a question, ask the question. It helps separate the what from the how and the why and the value. Because people do get mired in whatever data gets put in front of them. In this case, it's confirming what she wants to do.
Right.
So that's one. I don't know that fits in one of these buckets, but it definitely is for people. When people do lean back and ask themselves the following question: how do I know what I think I know? That's really helpful too.
Yes, and a variation of that I like to use is, well, tell me what evidence you have that that's the case.
Exactly.
Tell me what you're observing specifically or directly.
Right.
Because one of the things that we have to watch out for in the new hybrid work environments is it's very easy to believe what you're seeing or hearing within your online Slack channels, or for people to hide behind the screen and create stories that aren't true.
Yeah. And in fact, I'll tell you another story. This happened yesterday. My life is going to sound really interesting based on the last couple of days. I'm doing an organizational study for a client. This is a different client. And I got on the phone with someone who became very emotional on the call and started weeping and telling me these dramatic stories, you know. And I remember having the conscious thought, I'm glad I'm a clinical psychologist because I know how to handle myself with this. I can stay with her, be empathetic, but not jump in the boat with her. And so I finally said to her when she calmed down, do you know what you're telling me to be a fact? Has there been any kind of an announcement? And then she just stopped in her tracks and said, no. I said, well, could you consider that it might not be true? She said, yeah. And so I said, I think it would be wise for you not to repeat this to anyone because you don't want to be part of that rumor mill. But it was so upsetting. I want people to hear from me. This is a very smart, experienced, accomplished person who was in a state of distress, turmoil, if you will. And all I did was give her space. I was empathetic. And when she sort of collected herself, I offered her that. If you offer somebody a cognitive solution when they're upset, it will not work. Just take that to the bank. Doesn't work. And they won't like you either. They'll probably be mad at you.
And Constance, what would have been a cognitive solution if that person was weeping and they shared what they shared? What would have been an example of a cognitive response on your part?
It's the one I gave her when she had collected herself. It was, do you know this to be true? Are you sure this is true? Are you sure that this person made that decision and did that? And you sure they're an idiot? I mean, there was a whole story. But I had to be patient enough to wait for, 6 or 7 minutes, which when you're sitting with someone else's distress, that long can feel like an eternity. But I did. And then I was it was like her frontal lobe came back online. And I could see that she collected herself. But when you do that too soon, and the issue with C-suite executives or anyone is, I like data as well as the next person. I can do a multiple regression if you want me to, but I don't like doing it. But we take our data and we just sort of try to make that our only way to influence. And you need data and story. Because people's minds are engaged by data, but their emotions are engaged by story.
Most definitely.
And marketers know that. I mean, CMOs understand that maybe better than anyone else on that C-suite.
Yes. And kudos to Chris, who's sharing with us from New York. He said she was in her emotion moment, and you cannot make good choices when you're there. Good job waiting.
That's right.
Now the woman can listen.
Yes.
And
yes, Chris, you got it.
Go, Chris.
Go, Chris.
If you have you must have best friends and great customers that you work with, because I can tell you have empathy and you know when to switch things on and off. That's really, really great. And boy, do we need that now. Now let's talk about somebody who really knows how to mix data and story. And that is President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Yes.
Did you also get to see his address to the United States Congress this week?
I did.
On Wednesday?
I watched it live and I wept. I wept. In fact, I've got to stop thinking about it right now because it was a beautiful blend of story, evidence. He didn't just tell the story about the harm, but he showed us, and it was horrifying. But he did something that I thought was brilliant from a marketing perspective. He called out to things that we feel passionate about. Pearl Harbor, Martin Luther King. I mean, he tied those things together in a way that I thought was brilliant. And it seemed so genuine. If it wasn't, then, It certainly seemed like it to me.
Yes, he did. And there were just so many moments and aphorisms that I have a notebook full of them. And there was one in particular that will never forget, that had nothing to do with the conflict or anything, right? It was, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read this. When he said,
Yeah, please.
as of today, I'm almost 45 years old, but today my age stopped when the hearts of 100 children stopped beating. And the way, it wasn't just that made me cry.
Yeah.
It was also the pace and the cadence at which he spoke.
Yes.
And if anyone in Congress wasn't tearing up at that point, then they must be robots.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
and I ask people all the time, I have a lot of technology clients, B2B companies who I work with, and their first go-to when they are trying to tame turmoil is, well, I'm going to just show my spreadsheets and my pie charts.
Yeah.
And they wonder, and this is a live client of mine I'm advising right now, they wonder, why is employee engagement so low? Why do we have 47% turmoil? So, I mean, President Zelensky could be, and probably already is, the Martin Luther King of our time.
Could be. Yeah. I mean, he does a brilliant job of weaving fact and story. I just posted something on Twitter. It's a link to an article in American Scientist, which I'm such a nerd. I, subscribe to that. But it was by Christina Masloch, who is the author of the Masloch Inventory, which measures burnout. And I forgot where I was going, Lisa. Bring me back. Where was I?
You were reading an article that you wanted to share with us, and we were talking about over dependency on spreadsheets and pie charts versus that story that we heard.
Thank you. So I was reading this, and it reminded me once again that leaders' first job is to manage themselves. I didn't create that. Peter Drucker said that, and he's so right. You have to get your own feet on the ground first. And I also noticed that in this turmoil, I'm hearing a lot of people talk about two things. One is burnout, and you can go read, you don't have to read books about this, but if you just understand the concept and avoid diagnosing people, you'll be a better leader. Diagnoses don't help. And even psychiatric diagnoses sometimes are descriptive only, and it doesn't really tell you what to do about it. And the other is imposter syndrome. And I don't know who took imposter phenomena and turned it into a syndrome, but it ain't a syndrome. There's no, look in the DSM, it's not there. And when we categorize other people in these ways, it's another way we simplify our environment. You're burned out. You have imposter syndrome. You're not committed, whatever it is. And when we put people in categories, a curious thing happens to us. We get committed to our diagnoses, and then we start observing things that confirm that. And we don't see, and we see people in very kind of mechanical ways. And as a leader, when you do that, people may not know it exactly, but they sense it. And it contributes to turnover. It contributes to lack of engagement. It contributes to all these things because people don't feel connected to a leader that treats them like a category.
That is extremely true. And the last thing we need on this planet right now are more ways to separate and categorize people.
Yeah.
So this is a huge awakening. And the question is, as leaders, are we all going to wake up? Or are we thinking that we're just going to go back to normal, 2019 normal?
No,
And I
no,
can, I
no.
submit there's no such thing, and please stop looking behind you.
And that is what Maslow's article was about. Like there has been a permanent change in how people work. And I think that is absolutely true. And the best prevention is to know your people. I've written a lot about this. I write and think a lot about how leaders can connect. They're leading a big organization and they think, I say, you need to connect. And they're like, oh, I can't do that. I've got, X number of thousands of people. Well, you can. You don't have to sit down one-on-one with people for an hour, but you can connect with a percentage of those people. And it doesn't take a long time to form connection. It's formed by listening, empathy, and helping that person see how what they do every day contributes to, I'll quote Lisa McLeod, the noble purpose of your organization. Because people are not coin operated. They don't work for just money. And nothing has proved it so beautifully and so horrifically as this pandemic.
Well said. I love the whole coin operated human concept. You're right. It isn't how it works.
No.
It is not how it works.
No.
And I also want to play off of something you said there about
Sure.
how to connect with people. There is a responsibility for all of us now to take care of ourselves more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my teachers and coaches, Kathy Hawk, says that we all are in control of certain things. There are 3 different fields of what she calls energy that we are all now very aware of. Our first one is our personal field of energy, how we feed ourselves, how we sleep, how we react to turmoil, our emotional ability to deal with and react. The second field of energy is our immediate environment, how we design our studios, our homes, our offices, our kitchens. And the third is the global energy field that we all feel, even if we deny it, which is what is happening in our state, local, and federal and international socio-political spheres. And we can't control all of those. So we have to, more than ever, if we want to tame turmoil, circling back to what you said earlier, is we have to tame ourselves.
Yes. And one way to do that is to understand those layers of context. As you were talking, I was just writing it down. It's like, those are layers of context. And my description of those is I advise leaders to think about what is influencing their decisions. It's their perception. What do they believe is true? And we all want to believe that what we want to be true is true. We have all kinds of very tricky ways to delude ourselves, not because we're stupid, but because we're human. So there's perception, there's cognition, your thinking, your emotion. There's no such thing as an emotion-free decision. I mean, I could talk a lot more about that. And then there's context. If you think about a CMO job, there's people coming at a CMO from different places, trying to influence them, trying to get them to do certain things, convince them that the way they see something is right. And that's just their normal business environment. That doesn't even take into account a pandemic and a broken supply chain.
Right, most definitely. Now, you and I have another thing in common as we wrap up today.
Oh,
and
what
that
is that?
Well, you and I both are Buddhism students. We are Buddhism aficionados.
Yes.
And I'd love to know, do you ever step back and say, all of my years of studying Buddhism prepared me for this moment? And are you ever grateful for that as much as I am?
Very often, because what I've learned, there's several things I've learned, but perhaps the most important lesson is how judgment is the origin of so much suffering. And we judge things to be good or bad. We We tend to be very binary in our thinking, and that's actually what my next book is about. We think good, bad, good, evil. And if you can just say to yourself, maybe that's not so, if you can let go of judgment, for me, it's a very calming thing. And it also makes me I feel more empathetic toward other human beings, because we all leap to rapid judgments. We have to sometimes because we live in a world full of stimulation. We have to decide, I don't like that, I'm not dealing with that. And sometimes that's okay. If I'm behind you at the ice cream store, I don't want you to analyze all 80 flavors. I want you to pick one, But major decisions require an inner calm to be their best. And Buddhism has been one of my ways to be able to achieve that. And I fail at it all the time too. I don't want to say like this is like I'm perfect at this. I sometimes will sit to meditate and I can't get
Oh, I understand that. It's like, oh, today I'm having a crappy meditation. Okay.
And that's a judgment, right?
Yeah.
So you're judging your own meditation, and maybe you're even scolding yourself that, I should be doing this better. But I think that's one thing about Buddhism is it teaches you the art of observation over judgment.
Yes.
And I don't practice it perfectly, and I lose my cool sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. As Marissa, our producer, reminds me, don't should on yourself.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes, all the time. And by the way, when I do have crappy meditations, I'm not upset at all. I'm like, oh, okay. Hello, bad day of meditation. It's okay. I'm sitting here anyway. I'm just going to sit here.
Yeah.
And it's going to be what it is today.
Yeah.
And then I do my best to flip things into something comical. Laughter and comedy always calm me down, almost always.
Laughter is an absolutely you cannot use up laughter as a source of endogenous endorphins. Like if you laugh, your biochemistry changes in a really good way. And I forget that until somebody like you reminds me that, oh yeah, that's right. Really, in fact, some of my clients sometimes when I'm in their offices and I'll leave, their assistant will say, they'll stick their head in and go, you guys laugh too much. I'm like, it's all right with me.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, Constance, please tell us when your new book is going to launch so we can keep an eye on our Amazon page.
As you know, Lisa, with book writing, some parts of it are fungible. It's scheduled to launch in January of 2023. And if I had the manuscript here, I'd hold it up. I have a completed manuscript, which is now in the editing process with my editor, which is, as a lot of authors say, that is not the fun part. But it should come out in 2023.
Great. Well, we will be following you for sure and inviting you back because turmoil is with us to stay. There will always be turmoil. It's how we react to it and how we treat others as mindful marketers. So thank you, Constance, for joining us today. Enjoy your weekend in Atlanta and stay well.
Thank you. You too, Lisa. Great to see you.
Great to see you. So, my friends, it's time for our mindful moments. As you know, I always take so many great lessons from these experiences and conversations with these mindful leaders. The first thing that I want to remember from today is don't lean in during times of turmoil. Lean out. Find ways to zoom out of a situation and ask some critical questions. Number 2, make sure that your choices are evidence-based. Look for the data to support your choices. It's really, really important that you don't rely on something you saw in the Slack channel or something that you heard secondhand. And number 3, manage your energy fields. The 3 energy fields we talked about today are your personal field, your near field, and the global field. You do have control over your personal field, and you usually have control over your near field. Those can help you tame turmoil. So, what's coming up next? I will be back on April 1st, and I'm looking forward to spending time with you all. One of the things that's happening right now is we are seeing a giant sucking sound of great marketing people leaving jobs, and oftentimes they have no succession plan, or they want to promote their best people into a CMO role, and they don't have a ramp to get them there. So I'm going to be sharing with you a model that I've spent years perfecting, which is called the on-ramp to being an effective CMO. So I hope you will join me on April 1st at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time when I reveal some of the qualities of being an effective CMO and how to get there. So until April 1st, I want to remind you all that it's Friday, spring is coming, get outside, enjoy, and we'll see you on April Fool's Day.